What is up, guys? It's Cal, and with the release of 10.1.5, there are these new time rifts that have become enabled in Thaldraszus. It happens at the top of every hour. You kill some guys, do some tasks, and then you get to visit an alternate timeline to ours, in a world where Azeroth is not Azeroth. I thought it would be interesting to delve into these timelines and talk about the lore with them, and see what could have happened if things didn't go according to plan for the adventurers. So, let's get started. The Warlands is the faction conflict timeline. This is the timeline where the Alliance and Horde never created any alliance, and it was just endless wars. No common ground to fight against the Lich King, or even Deathwing. We find ourselves on a Horde gunship fighting against the renamed Great Glorious Alliance. That's the name we went with, I guess. I mean, it could have been like Affinity Alliance, or the Alliance Accord, but anyways, in this timeline we fight against a version of King Varian Wrynn that never died to the Legion. Once he's defeated, you can grab an oil-soaked book inside the ship cabin, and bringing it to Sora Dormi gives us a little more knowledge on how this timeline played out. So, in this timeline, the Horde destroyed Stormwind during the First War, but the Alliance were able to fight back at Blackrock Mountain and put the Horde into camps. But they were able to break out when the Undead Plague began to arise, and the Horde traveled over to Kalimdor. Now, the Alliance were able to actually stop the Undead Plague at Dalaran, so Undead never became a thing. Then the Alliance remained at peace with the Horde fleeing, but there was a subset of the Alliance that didn't want peace, so they overthrew the rest of the Alliance, and the leader, which presumably was Anduin Lothar, I guess, since in the lore he was the second leader of the Alliance. The first leader was Varian's father, Lane Wrynn, who in our timeline was killed by Garona Halfrican during the Horde's original assault on the Stormwind, but technically he was just the leader of the Stormwind humans before the Alliance were really a thing. Anyways, when that overthrow happened, the Alliance wanted no peace with the Horde and chased the rest of them across the ocean in boats. So once this happened, the Horde renamed themselves to the Blood Horde. Next up is the Mecha timeline of Azeroth. This timeline brings us back to BFA, where King Mechagon was successful in his mission with the Mecha Originator and eradicated all organic life on Azeroth, just leaving robots. The Mecha Originator is a thing that we destroyed when we infiltrated that mega dungeon years ago, and destroying it foiled King Mechagon's plans. Now, during this assault you can find a mechanized cog that you can turn into Sora Dormi, where she reads an inscription on the cog which says that King Mechagon was fighting for peace or something. Azmirloth is the next timeline. This one's a little odd. It's pretty much just completely separate from our main timeline in every way. In this timeline, everyone's a Murloc, and that's it. You fight Gil'dan, a Murloc version of Gul'dan, at Wyrmrest Temple, and then in this timeline you can find Alul Gallus, whatever. It's a Murloc version of Alexstrasza. She gives you an hourglass which allows people to actually leap between timelines. You can bring the hourglass to Sora Dormi, and then Alexstrasza appears and apparently speaks Murloc. The Murloc Alexstrasza is saying that enemies from our timeline keep leaping into the Murloc timeline, but Sora Dormi just brushes it off. Ul'Daroth is the Titan timeline, where the Titans became fully successful in eliminating the old god corruption, which is different from our current timeline where they just imprison them in Azeroth. In this timeline we fight the Keeper Freya, similar to our fight with her in Anturas, and she fights us, well, because she can, and she doesn't recognize us. You can find a Watcher's log after you defeat her, which shows a hologram of a Yongle, which are descendants of the Tauren. The Yongle roamed Kalimdor about 12,000 years prior to the opening of the Dark Portal, and they served Cenarius. Their workings around the Well of Eternity is how they morphed from the Yongle into the Tauren. They're significant to the Keepers like Freya, because the Keepers tried to learn defensive maneuvers from the Yongles, but they weren't really successful in it. Asmorn is the timeline of Azeroth, where the Scourge and the Lich King were successful in the overtaking of Azeroth. So this timeline presumably occurs around the time of the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, and not so much when the Plague of the Undeath originally started, because Arthas Menethil has already fully morphed into the Lich King at this point. So this timeline would have occurred if us, as the adventurers, never went through Icecrown Citadel and killed everything, I guess. So After defeating the Lich King, you can find a gold gilded vase that can be given to Sordormi. Now this is the vase that actually held the ashes of Tyrannus Menethil, Arthas' father. He killed his father in Lordaeron after becoming corrupted by Frostmourne. The urn was originally in possession of Uther the Lightbringer, who died trying to protect it, but Arthas killed him and dumped his father's ashes out to hold the ashes of Kel'Thuzad actually, since it allowed him to bring it to the Sunwell to resurrect KT into a Lich. Azeroth is the timeline where the Legion's first assault onto Azeroth back during the War of the Ancients was successful. Night Elves and Wild Gods are dead, and Azeroth has become a Legion-ridden planet like Argus and Mardum. We face off against Illidan Stormrage, whose title is Lord Regent of Kalimdor. It sounds a lot better than the Betrayer. Now, defeating Illidan, you can find an antlered skull on the ground. Turns out the skull belongs to Malfurion Stormrage, who in this timeline was killed long ago by Illidan, who has been fell corrupted. Now, something else that's interesting about this timeline is that during the first assault of the forces, you can find an uncorrupted Night Elf who ventured to our timeline from Azeroth. She hands you a map of Suramar, showing that she's from the Suramarian resistance of Night Elves from that world. And she wants you to give it to Tyrande Whisperwind in hopes that she'll send help to their timeline. So we give it to Sordormi instead. She's a bit surprised that it seems like the Legion had ruled this timeline for 10,000 years, yet there still was resistance forces on it. We ask Sordormi if we can send help to them. She simply states no. Then the final timeline is Azkaroth. This is a timeline where the old gods were triumphant. They were placed on Azeroth by the Voids, and they were never imprisoned by the Titans, like what happened on our world. So with that being said, this world is fully ran by the Black Empire. We're taken to Ny'alotha, where we fight the Fury of N'Zoth. Now, defeating the Fury of N'Zoth, we can interact with a chipped stone tablet, which has not been corrupted. Sordormi says that it talks about sacrifices to the Ancient One. Now, the Ancient One has not really been referenced in World of Warcraft yet. However, it is referenced in Hearthstone from a Hearthstone card. It was an old god general that was seen as their greatest creation, and it's a bit unclear if our main timeline has an Ancient One like this. And that's it. It's the multiverse of Warcraft. I know I'll sound a little lame for saying this, but I kind of like the multiverse concept. I know some people don't, but at the very least it kind of gives us insight on how the world would have turned out if any of these threats that we fought off would have won. But anyways guys, that's the entire video. If you enjoyed it, feel free to leave a like on it, sub to the channel for more videos like this, and I will see you all in the next video.